Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. Welcome back to another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room, where experts advise. In today's session, I am going to be installing TRIRIGA into a VM in order to build a 4.3, 11.3 version of the application. I have already downloaded the install files, so this will be a simple installation. Oracle is already installed. I'm not installing the full Websphere. This is just going to have the Websphere Liberty Profile. And then obviously I'm not using DB2 because Oracle is installed. Now I have already installed a couple other things. I've got my Log Expert installed, which is a wonderful utility for tailing and looking at the server logs. So I've got that installed, and then SQL Developer I've already installed and configured in order to connect to the database, verify my connectivity passwords, that sort of stuff here before I get an installation. So in order to install, we need to take the installation file that you can get from, I believe it's Passport Advantage. If you are a customer, it's the Software Access Catalog. If you are a partner with that kind of access. So I'm going to go ahead and extract this because this has several files that we need. It's going to have the data file that we need to drop in a new database, because right now there is not a database that's been created for TRIRIGA. And then it has the actual execution file for doing the install. So these two files here, you can see, are the ones that we really need. So I will go ahead and double click on the installer and we'll get this kicked off. And this is the typical install anywhere. So one nice thing with these the installers nowadays is that they will install and put down the Websphere Liberty Profile for you, configure the service. It'll even drop in the IBM Java to be used by the application, so you don't have to go out and get the Oracle Java, because I know licensing wise the Oracle Java has gotten really expensive, and so customers try to avoid that whenever they can. So it's nice that the Java is built in. Used to be you'd have to go and install the Java before you even executed the installer here, because one of the first things you'd have to do was then go and point it to the Java to use for the installer itself. So, progress has been made. It's great to see. And we're almost finished here with this part. All right. Now I'm going to install this to this my C drive, and I'm going to I'll have it create a TRIRIGA folder, and that's where it's going to install at. So we come back here, and this is showing us our version, platform 4.3, application version 11.3. Yes, that's what we want. You have to accept our licensing. Next, and then do we want us to install the IBM Java JDK for us? And yes, we do want that. We want to use the one, so we'll just put it in its default location. Again, that's kind of a relatively new, I forget which version that it showed up in. That's one of the things about doing TRIRIGA for so long and working in so many versions. You kind of sort of start to forget what was in one or in another. All right, now we need to go point to the Java file, and we installed that in the program files. Java, there's our IBM. And we'll select the Java. Now, this next screen is just, hey, where do we want to install to? I'm just, because I'm legacy TRIRIGA, I was used to always installing it into the just a TRIRIGA folder off the root drive, not doing the IBM folder. So I'm going to remove the IBM just because that's where I'm used to it being. But you can browse and choose a folder if you've already created a folder for it, or hit restore default to get the default path in there. I'm going to click next. So because this is a brand new instance, right, there isn't an existing TRIRIGA database, right? So if we were installing another process server, for instance, right, Well, we would select existing database because we're setting up a process server and there's already a TRIRIGA instance, so we just need to point that server to that instance in order for it to operate against. In this case, we don't have a database, so we do need to drop in a new one. So I'm going to select new database, and now it wants that data.zip file. So unfortunately, it does not, automatically pick the path of where the executable was run from. So you do have to remember where you have put it. So here's the data.zip file. Optional licenses directory. So if you had another TRIRIGA instance that you were installing from, you could actually point to the licenses folder from that server in order to then have it copy the licenses over into this particular folder so that you can start up. So adding the licenses is something that I'll still have to do because I don't have the licenses currently on this system. All right, so the Websphere Liberty Profile is what I want. So as you can see, it's embedded. The nice thing is I don't have to install anything else. Now, here's a little thing you notice on the Java settings. Now, I've seen this kind of alternate back and forth over the versions, where the recommended here is 4096 for both the min and the maximum. And that's been true for probably, I don't know, the last, 5 or 6 versions or so. But the default value on the install has changed. Sometimes or actually most of the time, it's been that 2 GB, and then there was at least I think 1 or 2 versions where it came up at the 4096 because it came up at the recommended values. So don't just get in a hurry and start clicking next, 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 because you do want to make sure that you've got the memory set up correctly. So as far as ports, I'm just going to select all the default ports. So we do have a session timeout, right? 1800 milliseconds. This comes out to about 30 minutes. That's a little bit fast for myself, right? I get over and looking through documentation or something and come back and then I'm timed out. So I like to set that higher. You can pick a value, whatever's appropriate for the type of environment you're setting up and you're installing. This is just a simple VM for my reference, so I'm going to use a much longer time frame. And I do want this to configure this as a Windows service because I want the TRIRIGA instance to start up when I boot up this particular server. So the name of IBM TRIRIGA, that's fine. You can set the service name and stuff, based however you need to, right? So if you're installing multiple versions of TRIRIGA into the same box, right, you're going to need to change up that data so that you don't have clobbering your service. Context path, I'm not using a context path. Everything's going to be off the root, but you see it just basically puts, when you're accessing TRIRIGA, another, section there in the URL. I've seen some companies use it. Most people, or most instances I've seen, actually, they don't. So I'm not going to choose a context path. But it can be helpful, right? If you have multiple instances of TRIRIGA that you're installing in your own VM or something, you want to have a context path and have different words, right? Like try dev, try whatever, try dev 2, that sort of thing. It could be helpful just because in the URL, it kind of speaks to what it is. All right, the database I'm using is Oracle. So I want to create the table spaces, the schema, user for it, and load all the data, right? So if I had already created table spaces in the user, then I could just have it load the data. Or if the table spaces are created but I hadn't created the user, then I can create the schema and load the data. So you've got a little bit of options on here. But in this case, I'm going to have TRIRIGA do it all, create the table spaces, create the schema of the user. Now, one thing that you will need to do after you install is you're going to have to go back and modify the table spaces. They're by default they're not set to auto grow, and the default install of TRIRIGA pretty much maxes everything out, and so you'll start running into issues right away if you're just operating off of the default. It's generally not a best well, it's not generally it's not a best practice to set the table spaces to auto grow, but I'm going to do it anyways because again, it's hey, this is my VM. It's for me. It's not like this is a production environment or something where I'm gonna be worried about it. But if you were actually installing this into a production environment, right, you'd have to work with your database administrator to manage the table spaces to ensure that they can grow without growing too big or too fast and using up a lot of space, or they might just give you a preset amount of space and from the get-go. So I'm gonna go ahead and click next. So localhost is fine, 1521. Now this all comes from where I installed Oracle. So this is a standard listening port for Oracle. ORCL is a standard SID for Oracle, and so this is all fine for me and will work for my needs. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Try data. That's the default username and password for setting up an instance of TRIRIGA. I'm going to just keep with the defaults because, again, it's just a personal VM. If you were installing this into a production environment, something you obviously are going to want to practice security and change, the username and the password. All right, so now this is the information for the table spaces. And so we've got a table space for the data, and there's a table space for the indexes. And I'm just going to accept the default values. I'm not going to change them. If table spaces had already been created for me, right, then I would need to specify, the names of them there. And so this is just setting up the database files. So, and then the size. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to add another gig into these just so that I have the space to start with. And now I need to put in the information for the database user, the system user, right, that has the ability to create users, that has the ability to create, the table spaces on it. So that's the system user in Oracle. So it defaults to the default system user password, which nobody really uses anymore because Oracle itself will make you change it. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now this is going to test the information that I put in just in case I fat fingered it, right? It's showing me the connection, information, right? Or my database connection, localhost 1521 is support, or ORCL is the SID. So I'll go ahead and click next, and my test was successful. All right, now it's giving me a warning about the multi-byte characters. So I would need to set up my environment to where they're not byte by default, but they are instead at char. Again, this is something I don't really care about in this particular instance because it's just a VM that for me, so I can see, how are things out of the box, what are properties, what are settings, what are, things like, so that I have it as a frame of reference for when I'm doing work for customers. So this doesn't really matter, but if you are supporting, multi-byte characters, you're doing the translations and, all that sort of stuff, then you'd want to take care of this ahead of time. But I'm just going to go ahead and click next, and then I'm just going to give it a time zone. I'm going to pick Chicago since I am in the current central time zone. All right, these is our data pool. So this is the maximum number of connections, right? The minimum is 10, max is 100. Again, just going to stick with the defaults here. And this gets auto-populated. This is just the name of the particular server, all right? This Windows box. I'm going to take the defaults. That's fine. And then it just wants me to validate, okay, the required space versus available. I've got plenty of space. I'm not going to run out of space. So I'm going to go ahead and click install. So while this is starting, now I can see here that the TRIRIGA folder created. And it's doing some work. It's copying over the IBM JDK. And our war file. All right. we got some. So in this folder, right, we do have the log files. So let me adjust and I want to show the file name extensions. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the ant log. I don't want to open it up so I'm going to go and open it up with my log expert. So let me look for another app. So my log expert is installed, I believe, in the program file. Yep, here it is. Log expert. So the ant log is a server, is one of the logs. So there's a few different ones in here that we can look at and pay attention to. But if you have problems during install, the ant log will be the log file that the support asks for. So right now it was just dumping things into place, and it hasn't actually created anything in the database. That's all getting ready to come now. So you can see my file started over. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and let's get this. And so now it's just a matter of sitting and waiting. One nice thing with tailing the log while you're going through the install process is that that it's working and the installer isn't hung up, right? Because this can take a little while. So as you can see right now, it's starting to actually execute some of the commands. You can see there's a lot of things that it has to import. So we're getting our first bit of the tables in the database are being created. So we'll just keep kind of monitoring. So you can see our folder structure over here. So while we're waiting on stuff to import, the folders you really need to be familiar with is the log folder, right? That's where all the log files are going to be. The user files folder, if you have to do some manually uploading of some, OM packages that are too large, or you have to have an OM package, export in the background, right? It goes into the user files folder. And the license folder isn't really what you think. There's a config and then a license folder where the actual licenses will go. So I will get those ready and get those copied over once the installation has finished. So I've got a folder that I have all the different licenses in, so I can copy them over. So as we can see, right, we've got more and more tables are being created in our database, and then the rows are being inserted, right, the records for those particular tables. So I don't generally see issues during the install. From time to time, over the last 13 years, I have had a couple failures, and I've had to go through the ant log and kind of discover, what's going on. I've had instances where the table space size was too small by default, and so it actually filled up the table space installing and inserting these records, and then it failed because there was no room, because the default setting for your table space growth is to not auto grow. And so I've had those kinds of errors and issues before. But again, not real often that I see problems here. Installing is pretty straightforward. Right? As you see, I just select all the different, default values. But it's very good, very important to know how to install TRIRIGA. Back in the TRIRIGA days, we used to always have a local instance of, whatever the current version was on our laptops so that it could, serve as a reference for while we're working on customers, right? And so I used to actually have multiple versions of TRIRIGA that I could start up and have the out-of-the-box versions. And of course, that takes up a lot of space. And so nowadays, I do it with VMs. I like having VMs better because I can take snapshots on my virtual machine. So if I decide that I need to go in and modify the machine, I can take a snapshot. I can go do all that modifying, and then when I don't need it, I can revert back. And so that way I can maintain my out of the box. So, matter of fact, that's one of the things that I'm doing as I'm creating these videos. Right, I'm actually altering by creating new objects in the system. So it's no longer out of the box. It's no longer a good reference for me, but I have a snapshot from before I started any of that. So I can bounce between my snapshots in order to continue doing these videos, and then also if I need to see for the reference what is it. So you can see we're probably maybe getting close to about halfway done. We're into the GUI tables, right? So these are all the tables that make up the information for our forms. So you can see, right, TRIRIGA comes with a lot of data right off, right from the get-go, even with hardly anything in it, right? There's some of these tables have thousands and thousands and thousands of rows. See, if I wasn't tailing the log, right, I might be wondering, okay, is it actually doing anything? Do I need to cancel this? Do I restart? Do I, you know? And so instead of having to wonder all that, because let's face it, we all get a little impatient sometimes. I'll admit that there, was a time in the past where I was doing an install and it seemed like it must be hung, and I'm going to go and I canceled it, and no, it wasn't hung. It was just taking a long time. So I've learned to be, much more patient, and then also to, just watch so I can see what's going on, right? Because you don't get the line logged until after it's finished, right? So it took a bit there because it was inserting, 95,783 rows into this IBS spec template attribute table, right? So, which seems like a lot of records, and it is, but it's because that holds all the fields. Yeah, we're getting some good speed going there for a little bit, getting some of these things inserted. Right, we haven't even hit the T tables yet. Right, so the T tables are the tables that correspond to the actual each of the BOs. So there's a table named basically the same as the BO name, and that holds all the rows for that particular business object. Learning the database and learning all these different tables and what's stored and where, and it takes a long time, but is definitely highly recommend that you do spend time to learn the database, because it will help you, troubleshoot and identify issues and problems that you cannot find or solve, in the UI, right? Just, even this last week ran into an issue with the customer's environment where they're, they had an issue with, publishing previous versions of a business object caused the smart sections to get, all corrupted. There in the properties, when you'd click on them, the properties for the smart section wouldn't come up. The information would just be blank. And you couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't, bringing in an OM package of the object from another environment didn't fix it. Trying to publish, a more recent version or older version, nothing would fix it and would solve the issue, right? And I had to fix it by, updating some information directly in the database in order to get it to where we could, click on the objects and have the smart sections working. So sometimes there are issues that you can only fix in the database, and the problem is the database is not taught at all. So it makes it very, very difficult. Fortunately for me, I've been digging in the database and kind of, you know, reverse engineering, learning it, whatever you want to say, for 13 years now. So I'm pretty comfortable. And then, with some of the tools and stuff that I've written to do text exports has kind of forced me to get in there and find where things are stored in the database so that I can, capture the correct information for doing my comparisons from, one version to the next, so I can see, okay, what all's really changed, right? And that just helps me to be, more accurate so I can see things, right? Like I'll see that the platform team has deleted fields from a business object, right? There's nothing in the release notes about stuff that gets deleted, right? There's no list of objects that are deleted. That is provided with a release. So identifying that stuff takes a little bit of time and knowledge, and the goal of an application upgrade is to make the environment match the out of the box as close as possible, except for the customizations, right? So if there's been fields that have been deleted in the base product, well, then I want to delete those too. And so I've seen where, okay, these fields got deleted, that cues me in that I need to delete it, and then I see later where, in the workflow mappings that are broken because the fields were just deleted from the system and the workflow mappings weren't modified first to remove the dependency before. So you get to see all the changes, right? And that's how I come to learn that there's no validation of workflow mappings at all. They just don't show on the screen if they're invalid, but they're there, and then they export out. So just trying to give you guys some filler here, so we don't just have dead air where you're sitting here, watching for 10 minutes as this just scrolls on the screen. So I apologize if you don't find the stories interesting, but I believe it's better than dead air. So we're getting close. Hey, we're almost to the tea tables. So that's a plus. So once the installation finishes and we go to actually start up TRIRIGA, then we'll want to switch from monitoring this ant log. We'll go into the logs folder and we'll see right now there's nothing in here, but eventually there will be. Once we start up, we'll have our initial startup log, which you want to keep. You want to keep track of that, because if you have problems, support's going to ask you for that, right? They're going to want to go through that log to see if they find or identify any issues, because there's times where the installation appears to have been successful, but if you look in the server log, there were failures, right? And that's a problem. If you see failures and stuff, then it's not a successful implementation. So this last year we did a upgrade for a customer, and they had done a 3.6 platform upgrade, but it wasn't successful. And so some of the different SQL scripts that the platform executes didn't execute and weren't successful, and then they didn't update in the database appropriately, and it made it to where you couldn't install any platform update. All right, it would all fail, and so the system was running, everything appeared to be working right, but couldn't update because it was missing some of that information. So I was able to figure out what it was looking for, what was missing, what was broken, get that stuff fixed, manually executed the SQL that should have executed, and then updated the appropriate places in the database, and then was able to get the installer to run so that we can move past it, and we successfully got the customer updated. So it was a challenging one. It took a while to figure out, but we got it, and we successfully upgraded the environment for the customer, and we actually had no post live defects on that one, which was quite remarkable. So got a good team doing application upgrades in a great process. All right, you can see the installer still running here, and it's still updating the database. I don't recall if there's a timestamp. Did this timestamp at all? No. Well, we can see here, I guess there is a timestamp that it kind of started. So it started at 6:34, so it's been, almost 20 minutes, 17 minutes. Still not finished. So it gets a little bit longer and longer with each version of TRIRIGA to install, because there's a little bit more data each time. Notice it's dropping in place, not MLA converted database, but a traditional database with a IPS spec assignment table. You see, right, just out of the box, there's almost 200,000 associations in the system. All right, now we've hit our T tables, so it's cranking and cruising through. You can see once we hit the T table portion, it starts going quite rapidly. Right, a lot of these tables, right, they only have like one record in them, or they have a few records, so it goes pretty quick. And again, if you have problems with installation, you're running into errors and issues, and you have to go to support, right? The ant log is what they're gonna ask you for, and that's the log that we're tailing right now, right? So as it's going through the install process, right? So they can see, where any type of error or issue is. So we got our workflow tables there. All right, boom. All right, looks like all of our data has been put into place now. These WF underscore tables are all the different workflow tables. So the WF lookup contains all the published workflows, and the WF template is all of the workflows, all the versions of the workflows. Kind of the equivalent of the underscore V tables, the versioning tables that we have now for the other objects. All right, so all the data has been put into place now. You can see now it's calculating the statistics, right, so that it can have improved performance in selecting the data from the different tables, updating all the different indexes and stuff. So that's taking a little bit of time. You see it's been 20 minutes, right, to create that Oracle user, create the table spaces, create all the underlying tables, put all the data in those different tables so that we have our updated database. So it's executing some SQL. Unfortunately, we can't see what the SQL is. Well, it's not completely true. All right, installer's still running, still going. No errors, no problems, no issues. Now it's installing the Websphere Liberty Profile, and it's got that installed. So you can see total time here. The build was successful. Total time was 22 minutes and 16 seconds, and our installer is telling us that we're done. So that's good. All right, I'm going to come to the config folder, and then there's this licenses folder, and I'm going to drag all my licenses. Some of these licenses are different, so I may not have every single new one, but I've got most of the licenses there, so I can kind of test and see things. The important thing is you have to have licenses there, or you cannot even boot up. So you can see here in our log file now, right? We've got a log on the installer, right? So it's showing us, right, all the information as it copied the different files. Right, and then different commands. Right, these are things that the support team would need. So now we want to go ahead and start our TRIRIGA instance. So I'm gonna run I'm gonna go to the services console so that I can run the Websphere Liberty Profile. So down here, our service is in place. So I'm going to go ahead. One of the things that I do like to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change this to an automatic delayed start. And the reason for that is you don't want it to start up before your Oracle listener and your Oracle service has started. Otherwise, it's just going to generate a bunch of errors because it doesn't have database connectivity. So let's go ahead and we'll start our service. So the service has started. So it's going to take it a little bit, and then we should see a server.log file pop in here, and then we'll have to monitor that log file on our first startup, which is something you do every time. So this kind of install is very similar for the platform updates, fix packs even. So you always when you do the install, you're gonna ideally tail the log. Sometimes you can't, right? You might have it on a Linux box. So I'm going to come open this with Log Expert, and I always want to use Log Expert from now on for opening log files, so I'm just going to associate it. So I'm going to watch. Now I've color-coded my different messages. It makes it easier to see, right? Like you can see the warnings kind of jump out at me. So I can see this is just one saying that there's an error with that character length. So I can take a look at that in a bit. And then clearing the agency registry. There's dynamic lists, right? Not correctly updated during the OM import. So it's throwing some errors. So you can see, right? It's running and installing some different object migration packages on this first startup, right? Publishing some business objects. So this is just typical TRIRIGA now at this point, right? When you're starting up TRIRIGA, you just have to wait until it gets to that startup point. Now the first startup always takes a while, right? So I've seen the first startup might take like 45 minutes, sometimes longer, depending on what it is. So and that's mainly due to all these different OM packages and whatnot. So we'll monitor this for just a little bit. I mean, it's not so important for you guys to see everything here. So only if there's an issue that pops up, which I'm not expecting one, but this is the very first time that I've ever installed the 11.3.4.3, so I don't know exactly what to expect just yet. So we'll give it just a minute because this video is already getting long. We're already running 43 minutes. So one of the things that I do like to do too during the install is, right, it's not just the server.log but the object migration log, right? So I can see, what's going on, right? So it's actually creating an OM package, right, which I couldn't see in the server log. The last thing was this was flush, right? So if you monitor the object migration log as well as the server log during startup, right, you can tell that things are going on and the system isn't just hung. All right, so I at least, I feel good if I see stuff like this. I may not understand everything that's going on, right? Why is it having to run all these OEM packages and stuff, right? We just drop down a clean database, right? Shouldn't all these objects already be there? Those are the types of questions that I have, but for whatever reason, these, platform maintained objects, and we can see we've got a few other little issues here. We got so there's just a warning, right? Object label conflict, invalid module name, for filter. So there are some warnings with this OM. So some of the stuff maybe can't be put into place until after startup. I don't know. I'm not part of the platform development team or anything like that, the release team, so I don't have any more knowledge than any of you guys in understanding what's going on or why this stuff's going on. But I can come back here now and see that it finished, and we started up in 4 minutes and 34 seconds. So I'm going to open up, right, and remember it's localhost colon 8001 is the default. There it is. Going to use the default system username and password. And now it's going to make me change them. They're getting really... going to have my... Oops. It's remembering the old one. And there we go. I'm in, so we'll just come over here, hit about, and you see 11.3.4.3. We now have a successful TRIRIGA install, and we got 11.3.4.3 instance that's out of the box that we can now go and start doing our comparisons to 11.2.4.2 to see what's changed. So with that, I thank you for sticking around. I hope this was helpful for you if you're trying to install TRIRIGA. I know there's so many different combinations of installs, right? Whether it's on Linux, you're using DB2, you're using Oracle, you're using SQL Server, you're using Websphere Liberty Profile, or you're using the full Websphere. It just, there's lots of different combinations. I'm not going to make videos for all the different combinations, but since I needed to build this VM, I thought I would record this process for you guys and show it to you. So as always, appreciate you watching. If you find these videos helpful, please do subscribe and like. The number of subscribers is really the only way to tell that these videos are being well received and you guys want us to continue to make them. Because these are a labor of love. There's no compensation of any type involved in any of this for any of the people that are creating these. So again, thank you, and stay tuned to the TRIRIGA War Room.